Yes, I'm Peggy Placer. I'm representing the Race Matters Friends Community Bail Fund today. I'm also a JWJ member. I wanted to ask about funding for police. There are many things we could ask about, but some people are on record as supporting more funding for police. This is despite the fact that we know that crime rates are not associated with more money for police. And in fact, over-policing has a disproportionate effect on Black and brown people. So we would like to know, if you're one of those people who want more police funding, how would you generate that funding? Through a tax or some other kind of reallocation? And if you do not support more funding for police, where would you put more funding in order to create a safer community? I also should have said at the beginning that I'm subbing for another one of our members, Suzanne Bagby, who could not be here because of illness, and she would have asked the question much more eloquently. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Placer. Ms. Heath, could you start us off, please?
Yes, so right now I understand that we are understaffed with our police force, and so I would support funding to get our police up to where they need to be. And I am encouraged by our conversations that we've had with Police Chief Jones about the neighborhood policing efforts that they have started and that they're going to continue. You asked how else I would recommend that we eliminate crime in Columbia. And I believe, I grew up in the 80s where it was just say no to drugs, and I think that if you look at drugs and I-70 and 63 and you know what that does to our community, I think we need to have a new campaign where it strongly gives people better alternatives than drugs, and whether that's training with coping mechanisms, whether it is diet, recommendations, all kinds of other things that would help people make better decisions and be in a supportive environment so that they do not turn towards crime.
Thank you, Ms. Heath. Mr. Minshew.
So really, it's to me, it's two different things. How do you reduce crime, and how do you keep people safe? And I have been in support publicly to get the police force up to the size, the staff numbers that it needs to be. I think that's what we need in order to keep our community safe. How to prevent crime is a different conversation. It has to do with drugs, it has to do with poverty, it has to do with different things, and I think we need to be engaged in that. But the reduction of crime with more police, to me, it's two separate conversations. So I don't think we need increased funding. I think we have funding on the books right now in the budget from the general fund to fund the police. We don't have enough police officers. Part of that is because we changed their retirement plan when the 2008 crisis hit. Shortly after that, we changed their retirement plan. Instead of having a 20-year retirement, we gave them a 25-year retirement. I don't know if any of you know a police officer. You don't want to be a police officer for more than about 20 years. That's a very tough job. So we need to increase our numbers, and then there's a separate conversation about fighting crime or decreasing crime. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minshew. Mr. Lovelady.
So would I increase police budget? I think that the police officers currently have enough money. They just have to figure out how to get fully staffed. With the extra money, where would I place it? I would place it in resources. Columbia is also already very resourceful, but thinking about Third Ward and where the crime is happening in Third Ward, there aren't parks, there aren't sidewalks, there aren't community centers, there aren't resources for people to get the help and assistance that they need. So when people are living in poverty or low income, they do whatever it takes to survive. When you're stuck in survival mode, crime goes up. We got to figure out how can we get these people out of survival mode Get them the resources they need. And that starts with a conversation. I think that community policing will be a great example. When police officers are in neighborhoods and they actually listen and they want to know who they're talking with and how they can help them and how they could be of assistance, that will be great. That will help them get to those resources. They will build the trust that is missing within the Black and brown community and police officers. So I would say with that extra money, I would put it into some resources that would pull people out of poverty and allow them to chart a plan towards thriving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelady. Mr. Scala.
Yeah, this is a very interesting and dynamic question. My daughter was a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. She retired after 15 years because of the difficulty of the job. In my tenure since 2007, when I first was on the city council, police personnel numbers have increased by 23%, and the firefighters have increased by 18%. Now the question was, how do you want to deal with the funding here? And I was a part of, I belong to the National League of Cities, which incidentally, Ms. Pfefferman mentioned the journeys that she has taken to some of the cities, Fort Collins and Gainesville and so on. Well, they are members of the National League of Cities, as is Columbia, which represents 2,000 cities across the nation. And they recently put out a report that I was involved in helping with on my capacity as the Race, Equity, and Leadership Council. It was called Reimagining Public Safety, a toolkit for cities and towns. And it had several suggestions, not the first of which, probably the most important, was to redefine public safety. And that means bringing in mental health issues, those kinds of things. The city council recently, or last year I believe it was, set aside about $500,000 for just this very effort. There's a lot of other things too, to embrace accountability and to seek public guidance and support and so on. Those are the kinds of public issues that we need to discuss and talk about. We do need to redefine public safety. I was unhappy with the idea that a few years ago we had a pilot project in Ward 3, 2, and 1 to put community police officers in the community. That had reduced crime in those areas by about 20%. Unfortunately, a previous administration decided to discontinue that policy, and that's what led to the new city manager and the replacement of the police chief. So we have some of those answers, some of those solutions. We need to continue to discuss them.
Thank you, Mr. Scala. Ms. Peppermint.
I am in favor of additional funding for the police. However, I think it's important to look at what everyone really wants. They want a safe city to live in, to raise their children in. So when we say that we want, when I say that I am in favor of additional funding for the police, I think we have to take into consideration what's really happening within the police department. Their entire pay structure needs to be recalibrated. There's a huge amount of compression. We've all experienced this in our careers at different places. We move forward, new people are coming in making more money than the senior people that are on staff. It's a huge problem that they're facing. We do not pay competitively. So all the law enforcement agencies around us pay more than we do significantly. Jeff City's currently offering a $10,000 sign-on bonus. We've lost 10 police officers since January. So when we talk about additional funding, what we're talking is the same thing that you guys all want in this room, which is to be able to raise your families and work in an environment that is non-toxic. And for that, I think additional monies that we would get, obviously it comes from the general fund, so if the use tax passes, which I'm also in favor of, that would help bring in the additional funding needed for this. Community policing works. We all know that true community policing works. In order to do that, we need more people. They need more time. They need to not be tired. They need training. Right now, our police officers are working mandatory 12-hour shifts. None of us are going to thrive in that environment for long. It's not sustainable. So when we talk about how we're going to cure this, how we're going to look at crime in our city, we need the causes of crime we know come down to poverty, come down to education, things of that nature. So when we talk about affordable housing, which is something that I want, when people have a place to live, they're less scared. When people have a job, they turn to less crime. So when we can put people to work, we give them a secure place to live, and then we put true community-oriented cops around them, this city will benefit.
Thank you, Ms. Pepperman. Mr. Foster.
Well, if you're looking for a way to distinguish between the two candidates for the 4th Ward, here's one place you can do it. No, I don't support additional funding for police, certainly not at this time. The police department is not spending the money that it has budgeted for itself, and part of the reason for that is that they're having difficulty recruiting. So I think it's one of the things that the department itself needs to look at, and I believe they are. We need to have an adequate police department, and we also need an adequately staffed police department. And we also need to ask ourselves, what are we going to ask? What do we want our police department to do for us? What are we asking police officers to do? There's been references here to issues related to employment and mental health and those kinds of things. These are the things we need to look at. I was struck after Archbishop Tutu died to go back and to see a quote that I had often used myself but had forgotten the attribution, when he said something along the lines of, we need to stop pulling people out of the river and go upriver and find out what's pushing them in. We know many of the things that are pushing them in, and it's a matter of public will, of political will, as to whether or not we will address those issues so that we don't have the issues of crime that we do now. So I am for addressing those issues of poverty, employment, and mental health. We have the ability to address these things, and I believe we should.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Mr. Seaman.
I love that quote that Nick just gave, because truthfully, the way you stop crime is solving poverty. We have workforce development programs right now. We have a program called CARE that targets at-risk youth. The goal is, if I give you a summer job, I give you an opportunity, that you won't engage in crime. The problem is CARE is underfunded, it's understaffed, and they pay sub-minimal wages. If you ask a 16-year-old who's lived in poverty their entire life whether you want to go work 8 hours on a difficult job and make pennies, or you can go down the street with your boy and sell some drugs and make money, that's a no-brainer. We're not solving that issue. So we have to fund those. I mean, I'm just being honest with you guys. I see some faces saying, oh my God, did you say that? I'm gonna be honest with you here. That's the truth. So if you want to solve crime, solve poverty. Come up with workforce development programs that are actually putting money in people's pockets so that they can live. Police officers, I'm gonna be honest with you. In the long term, I want more police officers. I want to see real community policing. As a black man, I have had negative interactions with police officers, but when I caught somebody outside my house during the heat of the masking debates around here, the first thing I did was call a police officer. I want to feel safe just as much as anybody else. But that's not going to happen until we figure out how to fix the culture and the policies within the department. The Missouri Attorney General sends an annual report each year that says that in downtown Columbia, Missouri, in downtown, our beloved downtown area, black drivers make up 3% of the population and somehow make up 27% of the traffic stops. That is unacceptable. That means that I am not going to go downtown because I'm not going to get pulled over. That is a cultural issue. And until we solve that cultural issue within the department, I find it hard to add more officers into it. Like I said, I want more officers. I want to feel safe. I want my 15-year-old son to be able to go out in town and come home at night. But it's difficult for me to put that extra money and funding into a department that has that type of culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seaman. Ms. Buffalo.
Peggy, thank you for the question. Even as a stand-in, I think you delivered well. With that, the question that you had, I wonder if it was the question on whether or not we wanted to increase police funding or the officers, because I've heard both people asking that question. And when we met with Chief Jones, all the candidates had an opportunity to find out how is the staffing level and what are some of the concerns in the police department. And we heard it over and above that they're understaffed, that they do have the funding to have enough police officers right now, but they're having troubles with recruiting. So what that means is that you have people out there working these shifts. Some in the most recent issues, they were talking about working 3 24-hour shifts back to back, and then having these 12-hour shifts. And then we're asking them to do their training on their off hours when I want to talk to them about how to think about diversity and equity and the responses that they have. So they're already just shut off when they're going to these things. And that's going to be an issue. It's going to be a concern going forward. The other thing I know is that in our latest budget, we actually did have things in there for mental health providing. This partnership between public health and human services, borough health, they do have a liaison between the police department, and those positions have been unfilled. They've been unfilled in part because recruitment's hard across all places, but also because they didn't have a supervisor of which to lead this organization. And so I think that's where we have that, let's look internally and see what's going on within our department so that we can provide these safe neighborhoods. Because like all of you, when I call the cops because I'm having a crisis or something's happening, I want them to come and help. I don't want them to proactively be coming over to my house if nothing is wrong, but I would like them to respond when I need them. And so I think supporting that, but then the role of the mayor, the role of the city council is to hold accountable these goals and these policies that we have. City council looked at the data and they saw where we're having high incidence of crime. Let's focus efforts here. But then council, the responsibility of us is following up with that, because we control the city manager, the municipal judge, and the city clerk. And so it's their responsibility to come back with those solutions and for us to fund them and ask them how it's going. Thanks.
Thank you.